Well, guys, thank you for joining this session today. Today we're going to actually take a look at Horizon 7 group policies, how they actually deployed, downloaded, deployed, and configured. We'll walk through the individual group policies that Horizon has to offer, and we'll have a quick discussion on how these group policies are applied, how they affect the user, the computer, the end point device, the agent, the client. So starting with the Horizon 7 group policies. Now the same group policies are applied even in the Horizon Cloud, because the Horizon Cloud and the Horizon 7 on-prem, pretty much the same version in terms of capabilities and the offering itself from a product. What we need to do is we need to, if a customer calls in asking how do I download these policies, or I've not heard of these policies before, and an example is a customer trying to connect into his virtual machine in the cloud, and using his client, and is not able to copy and paste into or out of the virtual machine. There are certain default settings that are there within the Horizon component itself, and to override or to make changes to that, we use the Horizon group policies to affect these changes at the user's next logon. So to start off with, we have the user go ahead and log into the myvmware.com portal. He goes ahead and signs in with credentials that he can go ahead and download the GPOs, the ADMX files. Now, what is important to understand is the version of the tenant that he is on, the Horizon Cloud version, mapping back to the Horizon View edition, and that is the version of GPOs that you need to download. So going in directly telling the user, let's go ahead and download the latest version of GPOs would not make sense, would not work for most cases. So in this particular case, I'll just show you how we go ahead and navigate. For most part, the customer would not have visibility to all these products that we have here. I'm just using an admin account. So he might just have only the VMware Horizon or the VMware Horizon View. So we go ahead and get into the view download components. So I'm just going to keep opening them up into tabs. So it's much easier that way. So as we can see here, the first version is this page actually shows the latest edition. So we have the different versions out here. So now let us assume that the customers on Ferris, which means an automatic comparison to the Horizon 7.2. So we'd ideally ask him to download the 7.2 GPOs rather than the 7.4 GPOs. If that being the case, the customer would need to go ahead and select the appropriate version. Once that is done, he can scroll down, highlight the VMware Horizon 7, the 7.2 standard edition. You can either go with the enterprise, the advanced, and the enterprise edition. It really doesn't matter. From the edition standpoint, when you're going to download the GPOs, it's going to be the same across. So if I click on go to the download, so here we have again a validation of the version that we have the 7.2. You have the release notes. So if the customer wants to understand if there are some improvements in this particular version, we have the release notes that he can go ahead and review. What's important to understand here is these two specific sections, the resolved issues and the known issues. That could also help in terms of troubleshooting. But coming down to this particular topic of GPOs, the user can come to the download product, check the version, scroll down to where you actually have the GPOs, the GPO bundle. So this is the version of GPOs for 7.2. One can go ahead and download that. And I'm actually downloading this on my domain controller. So the customer would need to download these GPOs and copy these GPOs into the domain controller's policy definition folder. So in a corporate environment and large environment, let's assume that the domain controller is on-prem and the utility server is not used to host a domain controller services. In that particular case, then obviously he would need to download and download these bundles onto the domain controller on-prem. Now, if he has a domain controller in the utility server, he can go ahead and you know quickly uh, you know upload these policies in the utility server that actually piggybacks as a domain controller as well. Now, just quickly download this. I've actually downloaded them before. So as you can see, it's very small. It's just 3.2 MBs. So it's a very quick download for the user who needs to be an admin, who can actually download the file and who can actually go ahead and update the policy definitions folder. So now that we've downloaded this, I've got it downloaded separately out here. So these are the different versions for the individual Horizon 7. So I've got a 7.0, 7.3, .2, 7.4 again. Now, if you look at this, the earlier version actually has ADM based templates, which gets imported into the group policy differently. But the current version of 7.3, 7.4, they are all ADMX based files. And this file format, all you need to do is just copy and paste them into the policy definition folder. And then when you create a GPO, you'll be able to see the policy drop down and the selection out there. But if you're looking at the ADM, then when you go ahead into creating a GPO, you need to actually import these ADM files after you create the GPO while editing the GPO itself. I can actually show you how both of them work. And as I mentioned, because of the features that keep getting enhanced or keep getting added into the different versions. So if the customer is on 7.0.3, if he downloads the GPO for a newer edition, he's not going to get the effect of that GPO. Yes, he can download it, he can configure it, but it will not work. So looking at the 7.4, let's just quickly take a look. I'll just show you how this is configured. We've got the ADMX files out here, and inside we have the language pack, that is the ADML files. So both need to be configured, copied and configured. So where do we do that? There are two places. If it's a small shop where you have maybe a single domain controller, which most of the time is not the case, you have multiple domain controllers and a central share. What would happen is the central share would be something like this. So if you type vmware.com, you get the same. And you have the sysvol folder. Inside the sysvol folder, you go into the domain, the policies, and over here, you will have the policy definition folder. In this particular case, since this is just a demo domain controller, it's not there. So how do we get to create this? Well, we can get to create it pretty easily by copying the policy definition folder from the Windows folder. There's a subfolder called policy definition. So this is the one that actually has the default group policies, the ADMX templates for the default group policies that come along with the Windows operating system. And again, inside this, you also have the ADML files. So what we're going to do is we're going to do two things. Either we can go ahead and just copy this whole thing back into the sysvol. You can paste it here. So this creates your central share, and it is accessible across all domain controllers. So inside each domain controller, when you log in and you access the group policy management console, you will be able to take those ADMX files and create group policies based on that. But if you don't have this in your central share, then only on the domain controller that you've copied your Horizon View ADMX templates, only on that domain controller can you go ahead and create a group policy. So in this particular case, we have the group policy here. I'll just quickly copy. Let's take the latest version first. So I have one. So as you can see, we've got 25 files. Let's copy this one. So EN is English. So once that's done, I'm just going to copy this in here. Let's quickly check that we have them. So we have the view group policies, the ADMX files copied down. Now we can go ahead and take a look. I open up a group policy management console, but before that, let me just show you how from our last UEM video, conventionally, a organization would have a proper OU and user and computer objects created correctly. So in this particular case, I've created a an OU. Maybe it's a company that has been acquired, under which I've got hosted desktops, another OU for service accounts, users, virtual desktops. I might have for physical desktops, laptops, RDS farm, or maybe a utility server. Maybe I have file servers. I have other management servers, so I can create different OUs for them. But in this particular case, for the sake of the group policy, we're going to target the group policy being applied on the virtual desktops. So in the Horizon Cloud environment, the OU that you want to target your group policy would be the OU that has the virtual machines in them. So now that we know that we have the virtual desktops OU over here that has the virtual machines, I can go ahead and open up my group policy management console. I can either navigate to the virtual desktop OU and go ahead and right click and create a GPO. But in this case, what will happen is the moment I create the GPO and I make changes, those changes are going to get propagated immediately to the end user or the computer in that OU that needs to have that experience that you've configured in the GPO. So we don't want to have that done. What we do is we first create the GPO separately. So these are all the objects that you have, the GPOs. So I'm going to go ahead and create a new GPO. Let's say Horizon 7 or Horizon Cloud. And then I can go back once I edit it, configure the settings, I can go back into that particular OU that I want to target, and I can link that existing GPO. So let's first go ahead and see what settings we have now that we've uploaded the new Horizon 7 GPO bundle. Now we have two options or two places where we can configure the user experience for their Horizon environment. One would be under the computers and the other one would be for the users. From the last video that we had on the last session that we had on user environment manager, I mentioned using the loopback processing and the recommended loopback processing configuration was to choose the merge option rather than the replace. So if we have a environment where the OU has a separate there's a separate OU for the user, there's a separate OU for the virtual desktop, and you're going to go ahead and create a group policy targeting the virtual desktop, but for the user, in this case, for the user under the user configuration, then you need to make sure that the loopback processing is configured for merge. So that way, these user settings, even though targeting a computer, when the user logs in, will give the user that particular setting. I think that was a little complicated. Are there any questions so far before we navigate into the policies themselves? Okay, so I'll just take that as no, and we can carry on. So I'm going to go ahead and expand the computer configuration. Let's take a look at what we have to offer the customer from a computer configuration under the Horizon Cloud. So if I expand the policies, if I expand the administrative templates, again, we have the PCOIP, the blast, the horizon client, URL, the agent. So if I'm targeting specific settings for the agent, I can make changes out here. If I'm targeting Horizon client at the client side, if I want to disable the option for the user to map a network drive or select a particular protocol, maybe BLAST or PCOIP, I can go ahead and affect that over here. So how this works is the agent is the key. If the agent is working successfully, the view agent is working properly on the virtual machine in the pool or the dedicated VM, when the user connects from his client to the agent is going to have these settings ready to configure back into the client. So when the user logs in to his session, he or she is not going to be able to see a particular option that you can configure here. So just walking down all these steps. Now, a quick thing here is it very clearly says ADMX files that has been retrieved from the central store. If I didn't have that central store, you would this was the place where you can check, and you would understand that there is no central store configured for the environment, and the user who's creating this group policy is on a computer on a domain controller that has these view ADMX templates. Now, if we were to go through the conventional old Horizon 7.0.0 ADM templates, then you would need to come to the administrative templates, click and add and remove templates, and go ahead and search for those files, the ADM files. Select them, upload them, and then once that is done, you would get the same settings. But since these are ADMX files, they automatically get populated once you just copy them into the policy definition folder. So going into the first settings, so we have two settings here, or set of settings for PCOIP client and the PCOIP session itself. So if I expand, we can take a look. We have all these options out here to be able to give the user that experience of connecting in. Supposing the user has an issue in terms of um, the display properties is not able to it sees a mouse lag, or the picture is grainy, pixelated. So you have all these settings out here that you can actually go into and make changes. So you can enable them, you can set the values out there. We have recommendations. This is very important from a communication standpoint, that the customer understands the recommendations that VMware has put in under the help section for them to identify what needs to go in as a value. Apart from this, they would need to go into, I can show you the document where we can take a look at BLAST and PCOIP optimization settings and best practices. So there are public documents that are out there that give you specific values to these specific GPO settings, and they can come into, configure them out here and test out that experience. So if it's something to do with client PCOIP port that a customer has changed, then he can go ahead and make that change out here to the port number. If the experience is in terms of the amount of verbosity in the logs, we can go ahead and have that enabled here. You can change it out here. The settings in terms of the range, the least versus the most verbose, this is the default setting that we have as set at 2, but we can go ahead and set it at 3 if our backend team requires further information from the logs that are getting collected. Apart from that, session encryption settings, SSL protocol. So here we can go ahead and define, again, the example over here. This is the default value that you have. There are certain organizations that do not want TLS version 1.0 to be put in, so you can enable it, and then you can go ahead and make a change out there as well. Moving into the PCOIP session variables, again, this is the client session variables that you can configure, and this is the individual sessions themselves where you can go ahead and configure, again, maybe virtual channels, image quality, further settings that you can go very granular using these group policies. But there are two prerequisites. One is the admin who is going to configure group policies must understand how the targeting works, must understand how Horizon, the client, the agent communicates to get these policies effective. And third, what these settings really are when you're talking about an example, a clipboard redirection, where by default, the setting is applied to the agent only, as you can see, where user is able to copy and paste only one way. You can go ahead and enable it and change that to bidirectional, unidirectional, agent to client, client to agent, or go ahead and just disable them altogether. So this is something that, I mean, there are tons of settings out here that it'll be difficult to go through each one of them, but from a standpoint of being able to configure a lot of additional settings, the group policies are always helpful from the default state that it comes out of the box when you deploy it. So you have PCIP bandwidth again. These are all pretty much experience settings that are out there, and settings for the endpoint, the client as well. Coming down to the blast, again, as you understand, we've got the two supported protocols, PCIP as well as blast. Even for VMware blast, we have the same settings. Um, sorry, as you can see, there's not as many settings as PCIP, since we've had PCIP for a lot longer than the blast protocol being developed by VMware. But whatever settings are out here are pretty much the same settings that customers have been asking for to be moved or to be replicated from the PCIP set of settings to come down into the blast settings. So again, screen blanking, you have an option here to go ahead, and it says very clearly, if you enable or do not configure the policy, the desktop virtual machine console will show a blank screen. So you can go ahead and granularize the settings in terms of the features. So this is 7.4. So we have the additional options of the to play around with the H.264 settings in terms of making sure that the user is able to see a better experience visually connecting over UDP. So that is another option that we have here. Here we can force the user to connect over UDP or not. Um, this would affect how the user has options in his VMware client, the view client, where he goes into a particular desktop or into a particular setting. When he logs in, right clicks. Because UDP has been disabled, he does not have that option enabled out there. There are a few settings out here like the clipboard memory sizing. This is something that is that has been asked for from the admin standpoint, to be able to put in a security measure and make sure that users can't copy too much of data using their clipboard settings. So when they copy maybe a huge graphical file, it has more data that gets transferred over from the client to the agent and gets pasted maybe into a Word document inside the VM. So here you can go ahead and enable that and set the number of kilobytes or bytes. That way, if I reduce this number here, you are effectively controlling the copy and paste of the content, the amount of content. So he might be able to copy text and not pictures. So that is something that you can control here. So it's important to understand not just what is there in terms of the group policies, but what it can affect when you go ahead and enable or disable a particular policy. It is very critical for an admin to understand these settings before they go ahead and say, let's just go ahead, reduce the clipboard memory because we want to just optimize the connection between the client and the agent. But that is not the case in this particular setting. This is there primarily as a security measure for the user not to be able to copy more than text. So again, we have just like we have on the PCIP, we have clipboard redirection, again bidirectional, disable, enable, unidirectional as well. So we have Horizon client specific properties where we can talk about time zone forwarding. So if the customer is in one time zone, but he's connecting to a data center in a different time zone. But the user requires, when he logs into his virtual machine, to have the time zone that he has on his laptop or desktop to be pushed into the virtual machine's experience. Then we can go ahead and come here, make changes to this group policy. So there are a lot of changes that you can go ahead and do even at a client level. So you can configure how the client behaves before and as soon as the user connects into his environment, and gets that experience that has been pushed out using the group policies. So are they I'm sorry, are there any questions so far?
No.
Okay. So apart from that, we have settings in terms of your USB configuration. Maybe you can go ahead and disable or exclude his pen drives, hard disks. You can disable his audio if you assume if you think that there is no need for the user to pass through his audio device into the virtual machine, because the user is not going to listen to a video or an audio in the virtual machine. So all those settings can be put in as part of best practice, as part of optimization, and probably even as part of a security measure to go ahead and streamline the overall experience between the client and the agent. We have URL redirection. Here we can go ahead and take a look at getting the user uh, to launch a particular URL either inside or outside the view session. So basically, if I say youtube.com, I can actually effectively define that user can, when he puts in youtube.com inside a browser within the virtual machine, that is going to get redirected to his local browser and open up uh, youtube.com on his local session. But if it is something like a confluence.vmware.com, and if he's trying to access that from outside his virtual machine, that can get redirected into his virtual machine and launch that application, because inside the virtual machine it is probable that he has connectivity to Confluence, and outside he doesn't have access to Confluence. Same goes with the view agents as well. So the agent properties are here. uh, one of the configurations is the smart card redirection. If the customer has a smart card reader on his laptop or desktop, that information can get redirected. So this is an example where maybe a bank has a secure website and it requires a smart card authentication, but I cannot connect a physical smart card into a virtual machine. So this actually redirects that smart card authentication from the physical laptop or desktop into his virtual machine session, logging him into that specific secure website, maybe a banking website. So that's something that you can go ahead and configure out here. Apart from that, you have all the scanner redirection. So all these features, basically, when you install the view agent, you have the scanner redirection, smart card redirection. All these things happen only will take effect only if, while installing the agent, you have installed or checked off this particular scanner redirection. If you have not checked scanner redirection, you're going ahead and pushing out this policy through GPO, still not working. Most likely it's because while you install your agent, you did not check off enable scanner redirection during the installation phase. Same goes for MMR, multimedia redirection, HTML redirection. If you do, a Skype for Business is one where you can actually go ahead and configure this if you have enabled that particular option while installing the agent. RTAV is real-time audio video configuration. You can disable it if you believe that the user doesn't require audio video to go past traverse from his client endpoint device into the virtual machine. True SSO again, that is another feature. I guess we'll have a separate discussion on that. If you can reach out to me if you want to know more about True SSO. But basically, what it is if you have seen Workspace ONE or our workspace on login.vmware.com, when you log in the Workspace ONE portal, if you have, let's say, a virtual machine assigned inside Workspace ONE, so you need to log into Workspace ONE once, but when you launch an application or a virtual machine, your a temporary ticket, a certificate is created, and you're authenticated into that particular environment. So you get into your virtual machine without having to put in the password, the username and password again. So that is True SSO. We can take a look at, having a discussion on that offline if you want to understand more about True SSO. We have some common configuration, so basically log information, the location of the logs, performance and alarms, the security configuration if you want. So there are very granular details that you can forcefully push into the virtual machine, into the view environment, and collect that information as well. From a view server configuration, I don't believe this is relevant in the Horizon Cloud environment, but it's there because it's part of the Horizon View bundle. I think at the moment I've completed this session, but if there are any questions, I can actually open it up for you guys to ask me any questions related to the session.
Nothing from my side, Surya.
Okay. So you guys, I'm sure. I mean, I just want to check. You guys are comfortable now in understanding where to download the GPOs from. Check the version of the GPO with the version of the environment the customer has. Where to upload or copy these ADMX and ADML files into the policy definition folder, and being able to create the GPO, and the requirement to affect that GPO in the environment between the client server and the agent properties that you have defined when you've installed the agent. So I think, are you all good with that right now?
Yes.
Yep.
Okay, perfect. So, guys, thank you. I think this. I actually assumed that this was going to be a longer session, but I think it was pretty straightforward. I think we can catch up next week on the session 2 on the user environment manager, and we can see where it can take us from there. Yeah.
Yep, sure.